Hey everybody, it's Tom Lynn, and I'm coming to you with some interviews that I did a few years ago at Media Bridges, and this one is with people at Onlook Films and about their piece, Cairo in One Breath, which deals with how the call to prayer in Cairo is being subjected by the government to increasing regulation so that the people who carry out the call are being replaced by recordings and technology. Very important set of questions, and probably especially interesting now because the interview took place prior to Tahrir Square and the Arab Spring and so forth, and so it has a special sound to it consequently. I hope you enjoy the listen. And today we have from Chicago, Illinois, three esteemed guests from Onlook Films, which is dedicated to, let me get this right, reaching across cultural divides, recording cultural history, promoting intercultural dialogue, and thus a world of peace. Onlook Films, and they're just got back from Cairo not so long ago for pre-production for their film Voices and Faces of the Adhan Cairo. I think I'm saying that correctly. And to get to, real names and not just abstract personages, we have Rodian Gilprin. Oh, I got it right. Jeremy Johnson and Anna Kipavasa. So, and Anna, I'm always going to remember her name because Kipavasa. I mean, who can't enjoy saying Kipavasa? But anyway, actually, not to shift too quickly away from levity, but what's going on in Cairo actually something, to my mind, problematically extraordinary, but which sort of fits in. Accidentally, there's sort of a theme, as our prior listeners will know, of how technology, despite the broad praise which it receives, and in some cases with merit, is still problematic in terms of how it mediates our relationship with each other and with nature. And we have a case in point of that problematic mediation in terms of something going on right now in Cairo. Namely, there is a 1400 or so year old oral tradition of the call to prayer. That is to what the word adhan refers. And 5 times a day, there is the call to prayer, a sort of extraordinary a cappella harmonization, if I understand it correctly, there's actually, I understand, thousands of people, so it starts at one mosque and then goes to the next and so on. And it must constitute something of a mystical experience, really, to that sort of cooperative intonation. And it's a rich tradition, and that's what the film seeks to document, which is fantastic, but tragically document it with a kind of urgency because it's very much imperiled. And that this year, 2010, the Egyptian government is attempting to institute what they refer to as the Tawhid al-Adhan, or the Adhan Unification Project, whereby instead of having all these, this polyphony, these thousands of voices, you're going to have a single voice broadcast vis-a-vis radio and remote wireless receivers throughout this city. So this is, documents a tradition, and it also documents this issue of what the Egyptian government's trying to do. So it actually brings into focus lots of things, technology, but also power and, governments and all sorts of stuff. So anyway, I'm going to stop right now, because if I don't stop myself, I'll probably go on the whole hour. Blah, 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 blah. And let me go ahead. You know what? I think Jeremiah will go with you first. Okay. And we'll just go around, and then you guys can talk, give a few preliminary comments on your individual roles in the film and your thoughts about, what the film's dealing with, and then we'll just go from there.
All right, sounds good. My name is Jeremy Johnson. I'm the field producer for the film. And I do still live in Cincinnati, though I feel like I live in Chicago half the time. My primary goal is to be the door opener for the mosques when we're in Cairo, to go ahead of the film crew to try and make relationships with the people there and get a good idea of the historical context to the mosque and get personal relationships with the imams and the muezzins. The muezzins are the ones who do the call to prayer. And then also a lot of historical research while there and also here in preparation. And Anna Kipperwasser, our producer.
The producer. I guess she's the money, huh, guys?
Right.
Anyway.
I'm the one who's in charge of finding the money.
Okay.
If we had the money, the project would be complete and the urgency wouldn't be as vast and serious as it is. But my role, basically, the project came into existence about 3 years ago. I visited Cairo on a 6.5-week trip to the Middle East. And one day I was sitting in a mosque called Amr ibn al-As, which happens to be the oldest mosque in all of Africa. And obviously the first mosque was built in Cairo in 642 CE. And I heard the call to prayer. I'd heard it before in Cairo and Jerusalem and Jordan. And this time it just moved something in me. And I kept returning to the mosque. And I kept falling in love with it and being moved by it. And something inside of me was touched. And, you know, just to put it out there, I'm not a religious person in any religion whatsoever. I was just moved by the sound and the polyphony, and it was amazing. And so when I returned to the States, and actually Chicago, I kept looking for this muezzin. Thought that there'd be recordings. I didn't know his name. I thought there'd be recordings of this important mosque. And there were none. I was surprised to find. And sooner or later, through some research, after finding out that the government is instituting the Tawhid al-Adhan, dedicated myself to working on an audio archiving project and working towards creating an art installation in which there would be an audio map created out of speakers projecting or implementing the voices of Cairo, the 4,000 mosques that are government mosques, plus the 30,000 non-government mosques, and making a map of neighborhoods and using all of the different voices, some amazing, some not so great, and showing Cairo on a smaller scale in a gallery, in a museum. And then, you know, about a year and a little bit ago, somehow, magically, it turned into a film. And we've gathered this amazing team, and it's an international team where we've got people from Brazil, Ukraine, Belarus, America, Israel, Iran, Egypt, working together to document this tradition. And I want to be clear, first off, we have no bias. We want to document it before the Tawhid al-Adhan happens, before these muezzins are no longer available to us. This tradition has never been documented, and this is why we're doing it. Not because we're against the government doing it. Our personal thoughts are of no consequence to the project. But that's pretty much what we're about. And also just want to say that currently I do live in Chicago, but I lived in Cincinnati for over 5 years. Studied at the Art Academy of Cincinnati, graduated with a BFA in painting. And that's that. Let's move on to Rodian.
All right, here.
Hello, this is Rodian Galpern. I'm a co-producer on the project, but I'm also in charge of all the art direction and the multimedia stuff. I guess you can call me as like a multimedia specialist. Part of the project is not just the film aspect of it or the documentary, but it's also an audio archiving project as well as, like Anna had mentioned, art installation. And I thought it would be a great idea to do some kind of multimedia library that's available to the public, to universities, to pretty much anyone that seeks out the information. And that's currently on top of helping Anna out with the producing in any means possible. I'm also working on the actual technological assortment of data and video footage that we have gotten already and that we're planning on getting, all the audio of the Muzians performing or reciting the azan, and all of the images that we gather along the way, putting that all into a database and have that be our own personal library that's available to everyone that comes in and seeks out the information. And you can find out more info once it gets up and running at onlookfilms.com. That's our website.
And my apologies to the viewers. The mics are actually happily somewhat sensitive, but we're sharing the mics. So as they go back and forth, there might be a little background noise. Apologies for that. But lots of different directions we can go in terms of the conversation. But just maybe to flesh out a few things about what's going on. Perhaps one of you could talk about the call to prayer, how it's structured, 5 times a day and so forth. And also you might want to talk about its relationship. See, Jeremiah and Anna are vigorously pointing one at the other, trying to, I'm sure you know.
Okay.
So maybe they can both take a stab, because you can also talk about the relationship between the call to prayer and maybe Islam more broadly. And then once we get that stuff kind of fleshed out, maybe we can talk about how this so-called unification project got underway. Before we do that, one thing I want to talk about, or one thing I want to, Rodian, when you were talking, it sort of struck me the kind of irony or the paradox there about technology, because I was obviously critical in my prefatory comments, insofar as the technology is apparently going to perhaps displace oral tradition. But at the same time, technology is permitting in a different way, this tradition to be recorded, memorialized, and so forth. So there's, that's just sort of an interesting tension at which I wanted to point. Did you want to talk about that at all?
Sure.
And then maybe we can turn back over to Jeremiah and Anna.
Yeah, your point is very valid, and that's something that as a team we've all just kind of been debating over and over again. And yeah, it is really ironic. I mean, not just with what I'm doing in terms of the multimedia library, but also with the project as a whole. I mean, it's a documentary. It's going to be captured on film, or it's. I mean, there's really no other way. It's just the best way that we know how to reach a lot of people and how to get the information out there, because today we have all this new media venues that we can send out in digital signal and just cover huge amounts of space pretty much instantaneously. And the main goal that I see is just getting the information out there for anyone that can't necessarily visit Cairo and experience it for themselves. Part of the introduction to the multimedia library I'm doing is an interactive, what we call an all-call. It's the simulation of how one muezzin starts doing the azan, and seconds later there's another one across town, and then there's another one, and until it's just like this harmonious symphony of human voice. So yeah, I understand the irony, but it still captures the human voice recorded in such a way that just amazes me, because it's 1,400 voices going off at the same time in this, or 14,000, thousands of voices, human voices. Yeah, it's amazing.
I mean, just to be clear, I wasn't in virtue of pointing out that irony, trying to be innately critical of your use of technology. What it points to is how important. We had another show on how technology is perhaps not merely instrumental. There's just something about the use of technology itself which speaks to our relationship with nature. But without getting into that, it seems that you have two radically different uses of technology at hand here. And I would suggest that there's something very subversive about your own use of technology, not just in terms of, what's going on historically, recording, but also in terms of how you want this access to be universal, that you're not striving to commodify it in a way or subject to a series of controls that enable its employment for perhaps other agendas. So I think that's different than what's going on with this unification project on the part of the Egyptian government. Now, I really honestly don't know very much about it at all, except that pretty much what I've said, that they're going to displace the human voice and with a single radio voice, which is then transmitted. And it just seems obscene to me. And I don't know anything else about it. And I know you guys are in a position because you're striving for a certain tentative objectivity to editorialize, but it just seems to me just like an obviously bad idea. But so maybe we can get back to that, and maybe you could you can try and moderate my visceral response. I'm trying to go back here. We're going to go to Anna because she just grabbed the mic. Looks like Jeremiah has escaped the spotlight for the moment.
Excellent.
Loud, so all right.
I just want to jump in on the conversation about technology and irony. Inherently, in our use of technology, we are going to commodify it. And we are going to do everything that, you said we aren't going to do, as well as not doing it. By making a film, we're commodifying it.
Well, I don't know about that.
Well, we are, because in the, not only new media marketplace, but also in the film marketplace, it's a marketplace. And people must help us by donating.
Right.
So it all requires money, it all requires technology, whether it's the unification plan or whether it's us. And there is an irony for what, technology is used for, whether it's to document or to get rid of. And some of the things that we've been debating in team meetings recently, really interesting stuff. It's been about what is the real difference about a live human voice that is coming through a microphone and a speaker from a mosque and from thousands of mosques, versus a recorded human voice that is coming through speakers, through one microphone, and then recorded and projected through speakers throughout the city. How can we even tell the difference between live versus recorded? How do we feel the difference? What is this connection? Why do we even care? These are all inquiries that we want to delve into in the film. And we're also really, really interested in how this soundscape of, yes, this tradition has been going on for 1,400 years. Began with Bilal, the first muazzin, who was a Nubian slave chosen by the Prophet Muhammad, may he rest in peace. And it has continued, but it has transformed. In the beginning, it was shouted from the tops of rooftops, from one rooftop, and sometimes in the marketplace to call people to come pray. And then it was shouted from, minarets, when minarets became used in mosques, because they weren't always used in mosques. That was a later addition. And now, in the last, less than 100 years, I don't want to be wrong, microphones and speakers have been implemented. So in one way, it is a natural progression in this technological age to move towards a unified call. And this is the government's argument. And they've been attempting this since they've been working on this project since 2004. And other countries, more metropolitan areas, have been implementing this strategy. Sometimes muezzins in certain mosques still do the call alongside this unified call in certain places, like in Jordan and in certain places in Turkey. And in Cairo, there's a really live debate going on. BBC did some articles and some radio interviews with the Ministry of Religious Endowments about the situation with the unification, and NPR has done some. I know that it's always in newspapers in Cairo, and it's an ongoing debate. And in 2004 they proposed it. In 2007 it was approved, and currently they're working towards building this infrastructure. But when you read the responses from the people on the ground, it's really, and you talk to the people on the ground, it's really unclear which direction it's going.
I think part of a lot of this debate too, it has its roots all the way back 1,400 years ago. You have in Cincinnati, for instance, church bells from Catholic churches and all sorts of other churches, and they each have their own unique properties, but they are still bells. They have the unique properties of wherever they were founded. And what you have in Cairo and other Islamic countries and cities is that you have this idea of neighborhood. Individual muezzins carry the blood of the neighborhood that's very individual, and it changes from life to life to life to life. And so it's got a much more living potential than, say, the bells of the cathedral in Covington. And I think that's an important part too, because now introducing another technological part of it, it's important for us to be able to capture that flavor before it's kind of homogenized with the recording.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you sort of hit the nail on the head there in terms of, with the unification, there's a loss of connection with the with local idiosyncrasy, and the social network, which is integrally connected to the institution of the. I'm afraid to say the word muezzin.
Muezzin, yeah.
Muezzin. I'll work on it. So, but that to me is like the real rub there, because if you have like one radio recording, okay, first of all, who chooses the voice? It's not necessarily a non-trivial question. But then this one recording is subject to in a particular institutional control, right? Mm-hmm. So to me, there's something very top-down about it, which is very fishy. I think that there is, in the reality of vital local institutionality, local realities, neighborhood realities, I think terrify the powers that be, so to speak, because they make it patently evident that we are not necessarily dependent on those overarching top-down structures. And so, you take something like the call to prayer, I think it's very potentially subversive in one way or another. And spirituality, I think that spirituality, when it's authentic, becomes almost unnecessarily subversive in our day and age. This is somewhat tangential, but just to provide an example from the Judeo-Christian tradition, and also the Judeo-Christian Islamic tradition, because he's considered a prophet within that tradition. If you take the person of Jesus, for example, okay, a lot of times people just don't hear the parable of the Good Samaritan correctly. They just think it's about being a nice guy. They totally miss the fact that before the Samaritan comes along, you've got a priest and an esteemed member of the community, both highly honored individuals, walk by and ignore this obviously suffering man. And the only person who reaches out to help him is a Samaritan. And frankly, most Jews in the first century would rather have died than to have accepted help from a Samaritan. So, what Jesus is talking about there is a transcendence of tribal and ethnic division, which is highly inconvenient for the subjugation of a population. So there's my little agenda, folks. Fight the power. So that's me. That's me. Okay. But anyway, so I think that's my take on it. Is like they're coming in here, then they gain control over the call to prayer. They vitiate the power of a local institution in terms of how it sets in its own generation and the fact that it's intergenerational. And they establish a technological matrix which allows for the perpetuation of this control.
Well, I think you two things that struck me just then were the hearing you say the word unification. It kind of made me realize, unifying things is not necessarily always the best thing, because when we're talking about that neighborhood quality, unifying all neighborhoods into one, that does, even in the name, it's kind of interesting.
Resistance is futile.
And the other was the who chooses the muezzin. And I think that that's a really interesting question too, because the idea is that Allah chooses the muezzin, and so I kind of like that tangent.
Right. Well, actually, that's really exciting. If Allah chooses the muezzin, who is to speak for Allah? What does that say about the Egyptian government? I mean, I don't know very much about it, I'm afraid. I'm actually personally scandalized by my ignorance. My focus has been elsewhere, So, but maybe you guys could talk about that a little bit, about the Egyptian government specifically. Not necessarily to put, you guys in a position where you're taking a tact. So I'm just asking the question informationally. I don't want to.
Well, I think that one thing that I notice in Cairo is that the politics of Cairo are similar to the politics of the United States, without as many flashy words and speeches. That's a lot of very normal people running a very normal government, I think, in a lot of ways. And sometimes I think it is easy to see a government of any nation or country or city the same as kind of the way we see ours, as these kind of figureheads of power and might. But a lot of times when you get into the city, you find that these government officials are really just like you and I, sort of thing. And so they're trying to solve a lot of problems, that like for instance the loudspeaker issue. As we were talking about technology being implemented in that way, to where they're not at the top of the minaret anymore. They're down at the base on microphones, and it's getting louder and louder. They're fighting for attention back and forth, because you do have these neighborhoods, and now they're competing like East and West. And so the government sees, okay, we're getting complaints from all over the place that this needs to be quieted down. How do we do that? How do we synchronize this? And so they are trying to solve issues, and there's always potential for nefarious gain on anything that's ever done by a government. But I think a lot of times what's going on there is trying to solve problems and hearing so many solutions that they've thrown up their hands and just decide, you know what, unification. That might be a possibility.
Well, that's a generous construal.
Well, I mean,
But I mean, I don't mean that to dismiss it. There's always a little bit of this and a little bit of that going on. So, I mean, I don't know, like, to what degree there's I don't know the relationship between what's transpiring municipally and then what's transpiring nationally. And I think that that's an important tension, right? Because I think a lot of times municipal officials tend to be more positively intended than people higher up the political food chain. So, my question would be, to what degree is this an expression of frustration on the part of local officials as opposed to the interference of people higher up?
And it is also, Cairo is kind of like a Washington, D.C. type of city, too. So municipal and state are really closely linked in the Egyptian government. And I would say, yes, like when we're talking about Cairo, what happens in Cairo does become state that will eventually turn into Alexandria and so on and so forth.
I was just going to say that it's really hard to say what government officials really, we can't know. There's no way. Cairo is, just to give a little perspective, Cairo is an 83 square mile city with over 20 million inhabitants. And, over 30,000 mosques, government and non-government mosques, which all have muezzins, and not one muezzin per mosque. Sometimes a muezzin does the call for only the Fajr prayer, which is the pre-dawn prayer. And then the one more muezzin does the other four. And sometimes it's 5 different muezzins, one for each prayer. Sometimes it's not even the same person every day. So, and they each have control over the microphone. So to say that the government is in the wrong or in the right is a moot point, because there's, like Jeremy was saying earlier, there are different concerns depending on the neighborhood. Some mosques are butted up against each other, and on the corner one, and on the other corner the other, and their speakers face each other. And so one is trying to be louder than the other, and you can find complaints about it all the time. And then you can find people talking about how beautiful it is. That's just a variety of, voices of the community speaking out. And I don't think that it's that the government is being all that.
So it's not really necessarily like my first instinct, perhaps, that the government has decided that it's going to just step in and impose its will. That in fact there's a genuine consent, and there are people genuinely struggling to find a solution to some real logistical difficulties.
I think so, and I think another point to be driven home on this too is that when we're looking at the idea of religion in a city like Cairo, that separation of church and state doesn't really apply there. I mean, we are looking we're looking at a state religion.
Right. Well, I mean, in some ways, the degree to which it applies here is grossly exaggerated by public rhetoric. But anyway,
but compared to
it's a totally different cultural matrix.
Yeah,
the relationship politically between Islam and Islamic citizenry is decidedly more intimate than what we have here with Christianity in the U.S.
But not to say that the decisions don't scare me. I mean, they definitely do, because anytime you build a tool, it's who uses it in the future that is the real worth of it.
Absolutely. So, and perhaps another thing that you could talk about a bit. I still haven't forgotten about your commodification comment, and I have a reply to that. But I don't want to get bogged down. Time is flying, actually. We have about 15 more minutes left already. So, before we have to...
fast.
So, what I found fascinating is just the notion of rhythm in the day. And, see, this is part of the thing that intrigues me, in terms of time and how we understand time. And, here in the West, time over the past century and a half has become subjected, often in very explicit terms, to economic imperatives. One way that this comes out is even in our education system. A lot of people don't realize that in terms of how American public education evolved, drawing on so-called Prussian models, was that you wanted to institute a sense of the workday and the children. So the reason kids go to school from 8 to 3 or what have you, and the reason that the day is broken up into deliberate blocks is because there's an actual conscious effort on the part of certain people who'd rather not have their names be mentioned to condition the children so that they can be good little worker bees. And actually, if you look into it, it's kind of disturbing how frank they are about that motivation. Right, and connected with this is a sense of, and I'm getting all Marxist here, capitalist temporality, because then you have to look into the profit motive. See, I'm so accidentally clever. This flows right back to the question of commodity, right? Because what do you mean by commodity? But we're going to let that go for the moment and just ask, each of you, maybe you can, I think it looks like you've all thought about this.
Oh, yeah. This is a big
So
topic.
Maybe each of you can talk about temporality and that sort of thing, the call to prayer. So I guess we're going to go counterclockwise. So we'll start with Anna. But all of you are going to, be under the spotlight here or what have you. So
You want to know about temporality and the idea of time? Is that what we're talking about?
Well, no, in terms of like the call to prayer and how day is structured and that sort of thing. I was just trying to leave it to you
Yeah.
open-ended, so
Perfect.
you go with it wherever you want to go.
Perfect. Yeah, it's interesting because even the non-religious in Cairo mark their days by the calls to prayer. So, do you want to meet after Maghrib? Before Aisha. We can have a quick coffee and, then we'll, go home or whatever. Like, you don't need to have a watch. You know what time the call to prayer is going to happen because you hear it. And it's kind of a magical, it's magical to me because, well, it's not where I come from. And so, and the way in which time is experienced is through an audio sensory construct, which is completely different than the way that in which we experience it, which is, like you were saying, economics. We decide that 1 hour equals 750. So it's really interesting, and the whole idea of temperance. I also want to touch on what I was saying earlier about how not some mosques have a government-appointed muezzin who is chosen through, votes. Once in a while, potential muezzins who've been calling voluntarily at mosques, neighborhood mosques, come before a committee and recite the azan, and they are chosen based on the quality of their voice, because that is the original reason why the Prophet Muhammad, may he rest in peace, chose Bilal. So they choose certain muezzins to work at certain mosques because their voices are beautiful. And they change through time. And you were talking about being intergenerational and having this tradition not being documented over all these years also connects to temperance. And I think, back to commodification.
Temperance or temporality?
Temporality.
Sorry.
Me
No,
too.
I didn't know if you were introducing another strand.
Just talking about how nothing is permanent. And
Well, how very Buddhist of you.
thank you. I don't remember where I was going.
No, I think you're just getting at how it's like a totally different world in which they live. One which is more connected. You're just talking about the call to prayer, but then another, level, I think, is the connection with the sun and the moon and the rising and the falling. Mm-hmm. So there's also a connection with the natural. Mm-hmm. And now with the electric light, we don't really pay much attention to that anymore in the West. Well, we can't utterly escape it, but anyway. So Jeremiah, sorry, to you.
In the same vein here, I mean, I live in Covington, very close to the Basilica. I wake up to constant ringing of the bells, and I like it. I find it comforting. But then an hour later, there's another bell, and an hour later, there's another bell, and an hour later, there's another bell. These constant ringings that occur at mass times are calls to mass. It just so happens that after that, all of a sudden, we started putting in more chimes at every single hour. And yes, that was a mechanism of control. And from my understanding, the idea of putting bells that chimed on the hour was a priest's idea, and it kept people at work. And that's something that does not happen with the call to prayer, or they still have clocks, of course, but they're not related to the religion. The tie of religion to the work day, which turned into what we kind of know and love right now, is not quite present in Cairo. And that time is based in like you said, the sunrise, the sunset. Daylight savings time isn't is not marked by the azan.
And so, what about you? You have any thoughts on this, Rodian?
I think they did a great job. I'm sitting here quiet because I was holding the video camera, videotaping this whole thing, and hopefully we could use it as part of our inside look section of our website, if that's okay with you. Yeah. I really don't have anything to add to this particular conversation. They do an amazing job. I just want to say that our entire team is super great. I feel so honored to work with a bunch of talented artists that are so diverse in their backgrounds, but yet like we all still came together as a team to work on this project. And like being the 10 core team members here in the States, we all pretty much have this Western philosophy background, and yet there's an Israeli, an Iranian, a Brazilian, our directors Miguel Silveira, and I'm personally Belarus, Anna's Ukraine. And it's just this entire team just came together, completely disregarding of our backgrounds and just kind of laughing at it because we think it's interesting, and doing this project on Islamic Cairo. I think that's super great, and we've gotten a lot of support thus far. We've actually sponsored by National Geographic and the Hartley Film Foundation, which have been great assets for us. And yeah, we're looking for more sponsors. As a co-producer, I have to say that. I have to. But yeah.
Well, let me. As long as we're talking about sponsorship and the whole economic thing.
Modification.
That's right. Because I just want to, I'm using the notion of commodity in a somewhat specific sense, in that a commodity is something that is produced specifically for the purpose of exchange. So any given commodity has a twofold aspect. On the one hand, it has its use value, that for which it is concretely employed. So a hammer to, pound nails, or linen, or what have you. That's the use value. But then the exchange value is what, if it's a commodity, then it's not being produced specifically for its use value, but so that it can be exchanged for someone else. So therefore for economic gain, which can and cannot be for profit, depending on the specific milieu in which you're situated. And here, under so-called late capitalism, it's very difficult to extricate the status of an object as a commodity from the profit motive. So the reason, Anna, that I sort of hemmed and hawed is like, when you're like, well, we're not really, we are in fact commodifying it, is because despite the fact that you guys are producing something which requires economic support and is being placed out there in the so-called marketplace, you're not actually producing it simply for exchange and economic gain. You're actually producing it for almost exclusively its use value, or at least from where I stand. Or it's a piece of art, and it's also a piece of history, and you're not concerned with just extracting surplus value, because you don't want to be expropriating that surplus value from your own persons anyway, right? So but you're not looking just to exploit yourselves for profit here. Okay, so that's the distinction. I hope I made myself somewhat clear, upon which my hesitance was predicated when you said, well, we are commodifying it. Because I think that what you're actually doing is you're actually resisting that tendency by producing the film in a not-for-profit fashion, and that that makes certain statements in and of itself. So it's just, but anyway, so that I'm just gonna leave it there. I could obviously run on in all sorts of directions.
Got it.
But we should get back to the film and Onlook Films. The Onlook Films, because hopefully, beyond this project, you guys will do other project. And, you commented on the internationality for a second. I was like, how many former Soviet socialist republics can you name?
It's amazing, isn't it?
Who forgot Moldova?
That's right. It's the hidden one. Everyone forgets Moldova. So, maybe you guys could talk about the internationality or transnationality or the humanity of Onlook Films, And if you have any other projects that are forthcoming beyond this one, maybe if you want to talk about those intimations as well, we'll just go ahead and pass it around. Why don't we start with Rodian this time?
Mix it up a bit.
Oh, here we go. Well, Onlook Films really began with three of us, just as the first core idea to do a documentary film, and then last May, what was it? May
12th.
May 12th. It was like sometime in April. We set ourselves a deadline by May 12th to either have a team or to like try to gain some other support to make this project happen. And sure enough, by May 12th, we got in contact with every single one of our team members. And ever since there, it's just been Onlook Films. And like that's really how it started. And the talk between the team members, everyone is so gung-ho about just keeping it going and not stop with this documentary. And I don't see it stopping. I mean, I come from, I'm a graphic designer with a background in graphic design and art direction, and I've been in the corporate world, and you know, I've been doing freelance stuff, and I really, I know this is really idealistic of me, but I really don't want to go back to the corporate world. I just want to keep doing stuff like this. It really fascinates me, and I feel that I'm doing something that matters rather than designing something that's just going to get tossed in the garbage the next day. But as far as other projects that coincide with the film, I know Anna has a show coming up.
That's not on the films.
Oh, but it's still you, and it's still pertinent to this project. So, opening up the plug for you.
Thanks. I have a solo show of my paintings that is focusing on the Bedouins of the Sinai region of Egypt, South Sinai, to be specific, in Washington, D.C. at the Jerusalem Fund Gallery. But I want to talk back to the whole Onlook Films team to stay on topic. And thank you for the plug, though. It'll be a great show. But you know, it's kind of magical. It was April 28th, by the way, that we set ourselves the deadline, because we had a few members down by then. Jeremy was on board, and several others. And then April 28th, we got the contact to Miguel Silveira, and by May 12th, he was on board, and Yoni Goldstein, our DP, and Meredith Zielke, our DP, were on board, and within days, Asan Goreshi, sound designer, sound engineer, sound editor, and Ryan Catfish Chindland was on board, also sound. Oh, man. And, you know, within months after that, we've got, you know, two editors. Dustin Majewski was on board from the get-go, and now we've got Scott F. Bush, who's, you know, another editor, and he's super. Oh my God. And the team is growing and is amazing. And Sandra Koffler has been on board pretty much from the beginning as well. So we've got Jen Reinhardt, who's our LA liaison. We've got Islam Khaled in Cairo. We've got Ahmed Rashid in Cairo. I mean, I'm sure it's magical. And the reason it's so inspiring and so magical to me is I was, you know, plugging away at this project as an audio archive, art installation, documenting biographical stuff, photography, you know, sending grant proposals out for 2 years, and nothing, very minimal support. And in the last year and 2 months, since we decided it was a documentary film as well, we have gotten over $30,000 in donations from our fiscal sponsor, Hartley Film Foundation, that you mentioned, Rodian, from National Geographic, and from individual donors that have donated through our website, onlookfilms.com. And it's amazing. We've done fundraising events. We're planning some. We have one at Elastic Arts in Chicago. We're working some things out in Cincinnati to have few events here this spring, summer, and we're working towards an event in Pennsylvania and in New York and hopefully in Los Angeles as well. So what can be accomplished when a team of creative people from not only international backgrounds of heritage, but also diverse career backgrounds come together? And our ideas come from all over the place, and it's great. It's crazy. I love it.
Jeremy.
Yeah, I it is hard to be the last one to speak because it's still have to fill airtime. I definitely agreed. It has been amazing working with the entire crew. I in the hinterlands a lot of time being in Cincinnati with the rest of them being in Chicago. So it's a lot of phone contact and me going up there as much as possible. But yeah, it's incredible to see the types of people that can be crammed into a room and actually have to hash out a project and it actually works.
And we all care.
And we actually all do care.
Right.
And that's fantastic.
It's absolutely fantastic.
As far as pet projects, I do have a show on October 8th at Prairie Gallery in Northside, David Rosenthal's space, called Meddling with Nature, that is taxidermy based work, so it really has nothing to do with limousines, but
just in terms of it being fantastic, there's Rhodey, and you said, oh, I know this seems idealistic, but I just don't want to go back to corporate work and so forth, and just my anarchist friends, they have a saying. They say, be realistic, demand the impossible. So that's right.
And defy gravity. That's Rodian's saying.
So, and also, I think that, it's just more human because you're not doing this for the sake of something else. You're not just doing this to make money or whatever. I think that, it's just not a human way to relate with each other or the world. So, the fire that arises as a consequence of this more authentic engagement is actually incredibly powerful. So, it is idealistic, but it's also ultimately realistic in a deeper sense of that word. Do you want to reply?
Yeah, I totally agree with you, and I mean, I don't think I'll ever stop freelancing because really that's my bread and butter. That's how I make money to live, to support myself. But also, I mean, I deal with basically my whole job is to communicate an idea or a message visually. It's just the output of that sometimes is a bit disheartening. Not so much because of the clients. My clients are great. I love them. But it's just a matter of doing something like, say, I don't know, like a flyer, postcard, a magazine ad. I mean, all of that has a shelf life. And the thing that really inspires me is working on this project is what kind of shelf life not only does this documentary will have, but also the entire project in and of itself. I mean, we've got this, it is an archive. I mean, it's something that could potentially be submitted to the Library of Congress and sit there and be available to people for many generations to come. And that's where my inspiration of comes from, to continue doing such projects. And yeah, in a non-for-profit way, is especially because I mean, I don't think any of us are looking to get rich off of this. Wouldn't hurt, but yeah. But I mean, it's great to know that like that's what we're kind of working on, is to kind of leave a piece of ourselves behind, and
and a piece of this time too.
Yeah, exactly. So that's all I really wanted to say.
So, and we're coming up here. So maybe, do you want to say something, Jeremy, coming up at the end, and then Anna?
Yeah, sure. I think that people will find this project incredibly engaging, and I think that that's proof that we have proof of that by locking this many people into a room, like I said, and all of us actually deeply care, and we think that everybody else will deeply care too. And it's something that is quite foreign to the United States in a lot of ways. This is kind of a nice new country of filmmaking, I think, for this project.
Yeah, all I have to say is that not only is the project engaging because of the subject matter and because of the documenting and archiving of a ancient tradition, as it were, and in this day and age, but it's also engaging because of the actual individual characters who we are documenting. The muezzins that we have met and interviewed so far and have gotten to interact with are so different from one another and perceive their role as muezzins so differently and so diversely. It really inspires me, and I think that is what drives the film itself. It's a character-driven documentary, which may function to engage the viewers. Most people are used to documentaries being dry and documentary style, and narratives being more interesting and being about the characters. And I think this is where this project becomes really great, because we're interested in theory, we're interested in history, we're interested in today and technology, and in the people themselves, the humanity, as we've been discussing.
And if people aren't interested in it, we'll just throw some dancing bears into the movie. Sell it that way, rebrand it.
That's right. It's all about branding. So, well, I guess that, the thing is, I feel like despite, our aspirations, we only touched on the surface of things because of the limitations of time here. But Onlook Films at onlookfilms.com, right?
Yep.
And they also have a Facebook page and all that stuff. Definitely check them out. They rock. And well, I guess that's that for now. Again, this has been Anna Kipperwasser and Jeremy Johnson and Rodian Galprin. Oh my God.
It's sad we gotta end. Just started getting...
I know. It always happens on Radical Analysis. We come up here, we're just at the end of the prologue, and it's like, we gotta go, guys. So, well, anyway. Thank you so much for being on, and thank you, Cincinnati, for listening. And we'll go back.
Thank you.
Well, you're very much welcome. And if you ever want to come back for anything else, just let me know, any of you. So,
Got a schedule after this, then.
So, all right, then, rock and roll. All right. Well, with
roll.
that, guys, we're going to sign off. Oh, I almost forgot. I'm so bad. It must be my anarchist sympathies that I tend to overlook such legalistic considerations. But WVQC, as a community radio station, serves only to open its airwaves to responsible, divergent points of view. The opinions expressed on this program do not reflect the views of WVQC, Media Bridges' staff, or its board of trustees. The opinions expressed reflect the views of the programmer or their guests. And thank you for listening.